What's up, everyone? Thomas here with For Real Movie News and Reviews. And after seeing Something in the Dirt, I am very excited to have the opportunity to talk with the film's editor. In this behind the camera discussion, I get to talk with Michael Felker about his part in bringing this movie and this interesting sci-fi story to life. So thank you so much, Michael, for joining me and having this conversation.
Of course. Thank you for having me, Thomas. I'm happy to be a part of this. And
Yeah.
don't, and by the way, don't worry about my name. I stumble over my name all the time. I get Faulkner, Feller. It happens so
I know,
much.
and that's what I'm like. I want to make sure I pronounce it right, but then the syllables don't work for me. Anyway, I appreciate
Uh,
your
of course.
understanding. Well, have you been able to participate at all with Sundance or watch any Sundance films, or are you
I have. I've done a little bit of like as much as you can
yeah.
remotely from home, but I've seen a couple of movies. I saw Call Jane. I
Oh,
saw
nice.
Duel, and I saw Duel.
Ah, interesting. What do you think about those?
Yeah, I really like Call Jane. There's some really intense sequences of, I guess, given the subject matter with the abortion sequences, they're
Hmm.
very well done and very methodical. So,
Right.
and Sigourney Weaver and Elizabeth Banks are amazing in it. And then
Hmm.
Duel is like right up my alley. It's
Yeah.
just the type of movie that I love. And yeah, the whole team with Duel really killed it. It was funny and dark and grim, and I loved it.
Yeah, for sure. I also had the chance to see both of those, and I think you're spot on. Some great performances in Call Jane, and then Duel. Just yeah, it's so interesting. I think Riley Stearns has such a fascinating style to his films, which is increasingly interesting because I think Aaron and Justin also have their own kind of style, and it's fun to see these movies happen in these worlds with these filmmakers who are really good at curating their signature style. And of course, you have a part to play in that with Aaron and Justin's movies. So
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like all of my favorite, at least genre filmmakers, just have this splash of vision that they are able to pull into the screen and the script and the edit. And like it makes me love indie genre films because you just won't get that when you find like someone like a Riley or an Aaron and Justin.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I was curious, what got you into editing and all the other things that you do in the filmmaking world?
Oh, sorry, one more time. I think you broke up a little bit there.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, no, I was
That's
wondering
okay.
what got you into filmmaking and the editing world.
I could go far back
let's
or
let's
a
go
little
let's
bit.
go really far back because something else I want to address is the fact that you've worked a lot with Aaron and Justin. So let's start from the beginning.
Yeah. So I was born in Huntsville, Alabama, which is like a weird, like nerdy blue bubble in Alabama. It's full of rocket scientists and engineers from everywhere else. So my dad is he's an engineer. He's a huge sci-fi nerd. So he raised me on a ton of movies that are sci-fi based, but like obviously Star Wars. But he also got me really into Star Trek. And when he showed me The Matrix on DVD when I was like 9, I was just like, well, this is what I want to do. I want to do what these people do. Like what Wachowski's ended up doing with that was just blew my mind. So I did everything I could to go into film school at Florida State. And fast forward to 2011, fresh out of film school, I was like, I want to be on set doing work with a bunch of people and making crafty, cool DIY films. And that's where I ran into Aaron and Justin. They hired me on as a PA for Resolution, which is their first movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like the one of like 7 crew members just running around. Like I don't know if you've seen Resolution. Um,
That's the one I haven't seen yet.
no, it's okay. So Resolution is like it's very like got a lot of similar things from their other movies, where it's like 2 guys are in the woods and one's like helping the other recover from like a drug addiction. But while they're like locked up in this cabin, going through that, weird stuff happens that like foretells like the whole history of the land and the cabin they're on. So I'm running around doing crazy things that are like ghost tricks around the cabin, like flipping on lights and projectors that come on by themselves. So we got along from that. But then my path took me into post production for a while, where I was like working in post halls, like working in reality TV, working my way up as an editor till I went freelance, and then met up with the guys again and became their assistant editor and eventually their editor on VHS Viral, which is their or Bone Storm, which is their short segment on VHS Viral. And ever since then, just been working with them as an editor.
That's awesome. Something that they've talked, or at least that I've heard a lot from them over the festival, whether it was in interviews or even on their Twitter page, is how much they appreciate filmmaking with friends. And I imagine you are one of those friends that they are alluding to.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me more about your relationship with them and what it's like working with them.
Oh man, I mean, well, I guess going with like Resolution, we just really just got along buddy. Like those guys they want to make something cool, something interesting. They always want to like scratch their genre influences, like something in the dirt has X-Files and Unsolved Mysteries as their influences. And that's just stuff that Justin grew up with. So like going into my sci-fi influences, which was like Star Trek and The Matrix and whatnot, we really bonded and just wanted to just make cool things. So when I did pivot into post-production and they wanted me to come back on to like work, I was like, oh, I'm not working on set. But they're like, oh, let's bring you into post. And those guys are just like, as you could tell, they wear so many different hats that they already know how post-production works. So it's really just now like working with them is just fun experimentation. Like, you're sitting in front of a computer, but it's basically a lab of like, what can we do to further accentuate all of these cool ideas that are in Justin's scripts and with like Aaron's like cinematography, like what can we do? And because we have such good camaraderie from that first movie, it doesn't feel hard. It just feels fun.
Nice. I mean, that's what you hope for in your career, is for the work to be more fun than it is work, right? And so
yeah, absolutely.
So like I said, Resolution is the one that I haven't seen yet and I need to, but I've seen obviously Spring, The Endless, Synchronic, and Something in the Dirt. And of those, I was thinking about it before this interview. I think my favorite still is the Endless. That's the one that got me hooked on Justin and Aaron's filmmaking, and it's just a fantastic film. Synchronic comes in a very solid second place. But you know what I find interesting about all these films is that they have signature Justin and Aaron style, right? But they also feel kind of different. They all kind of have their own flavor, I guess. And so I'm curious, as the editor of these films, what is it like approaching a Justin and Aaron project, and how do you go about deciding how to tackle editing one of their films?
Well, for them, it's just always like like with Spring, with Endless, and Synchronic, it's always some form of a two-hander. And with those guys, they're in constant conversation with each other as like co-leads of making this movie. And it's always about the characters with them. And it's always about going through what, each one of them are going through and trying to find the best way to wrestle with those things in genre conventions. So like, yeah, I mean, if they all feel a little different because we all go with like, how can we treat this without being like reliant on genre tropes? We don't think about like what's the best scare or what's the weirdest thing we can totally do. Like we do think of those things as tools, but they all still influence these characters that are going through things. And like you were saying, the Endless is just about like two brothers who go back to a life that is not the way they thought it would be when they escaped, and when they come back they're in different terms. And that's just something that happens when you work with creatives over time. And it's something that they've wrestled with too as they navigate the indie world, and that's something I've navigated with too when going from different directors. And the reason why I go back to those guys is because it's always about the character there.
That's so important. I think the movies that I like and love and appreciate the most are the ones that can focus on the characters, right? And where character development is such a crucial component to how the film develops and unfolds. And I think you make a valid point, and I've said this in other interviews and other conversations before, where the jump scares aren't really those don't really get me interested, right? And I think that so much of mainstream horror and sci-fi or whatever can rely a little bit too heavily on that. And so it's so nice to be able to come back to this indie genre space and just enjoy a movie that is character development and with weird stuff going on for sure, but for sure.
No, yeah. I think it's like, because like at the end of the day, we just want to care about the people that are going through all these different things. And with Something in the Dirt, it's even like tenfold, because it's basically two guys who are in isolation and they're stir crazy, which is what a lot of people went through these last couple of years. And like, Something in the Dirt isn't like about the pandemic, but it's about people who went through something of an isolation, and all you have is to go down these wormholes, finding like what your meaning is in this kind of existence. And if there are jump scares or mood setters or anything in our tools of genre filmmakers that we can use to exemplify that, great. But it's never about being like, ooh, we got them because we made the sound loud and they jumped. Like, it's all about like, oh man, I connected with Levi because I've been in that situation too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure as an editor, you edit a bunch of different kinds of entertainment and genres of films or whatever. I was curious how difficult it is to transition from editing sci-fi and these genre films that you like, and between that and editing like more episodic stuff, more drama or comedy or whatever. How different is that, and is it challenging for you to switch between that, or have you gotten pretty proficient at it?
It depends, I guess, on the philosophy of the project that you're working with, or more broadly the genre. Like, I think you kind of always have to answer why you specifically like a certain genre project. And speaking broadly to like something like sci-fi, I like that sci-fi is one of the few genres that is where I think sci-fi is one of the few genres where you can get away with the audience leaving questions, and that's a good thing. Because a lot of people, a lot of people want to go and get some sort of closure, which means you get answers to questions that the movies pose. But great sci-fi, you come away being like, man, I now have more questions about the world and the universe that I'm in, and I want to dig deep with people I saw it with over coffee afterwards. And and that's how we approach sci-fi. It's like, and especially with Something in the Dirt, where there's questions everywhere, I hope it inspires discussion, as opposed to like a drama. Drama is a little more broad because it could be a lot of different things. But like comedy, we just want people to have a good time and like have them make sure that they have like a hearty laughter in them that makes them feel like they are just happier about their existence in life as they leave the theater. So there's a lot of different approaches.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is unfortunate that that Sundance wasn't able to do this in person, because I could absolutely see us leaving the theater from Something in the Dirt, finding a pub and sitting down and
that
having
sounds
a
awesome.
discussion. I know, right? Next time that'll be fun. But I really appreciate that that's how you approach this, is from that perspective. Like, this isn't just something to go experience and then leave at the theater, right? Like, you can take a movie like this or any of Aaron and Justin's films and then take it afterward and chew on it with other people and like talk it over and think about it and come to conclusions. And so that I think that there's something really, really special with that.
Yeah, it's why it's my favorite genre, and that's why I like, The Matrix is one of those movies that kind of covers all of that. Not only do you get like an insanely great time with just like an awesome, well choreographed action movie, but then you're just sitting there being like, but what about this world that just blew my mind? Like, and then you have the best of both worlds. I love sci-fi.
Have you seen the new Matrix? Just kind of off topic a little bit. Have you seen the new one? Was it everything you hoped and dreamed for?
So I'm the kind of guy who definitely was just like reading every interview or any snippet going in, because I like the sequels too. I like Reloaded. I like Revolutions, excuse me, because those movies tickle that sci-fi itch of like leaving with a bunch of questions and debating like these types of theories and things that the movies pose. And this one being like a heady filmmaker in general, the fact that it like, you know, I won't go into spoilers, but the movie blows your mind early on and kind of doesn't really let off the gas even when you get to some familiar territory as it goes, because you kind of just left being like, whoa, I love how they're approaching I love how Lana's like approaching this franchise that has morphed and evolved over the last 20 or so years, and what Lana's take is on it. So it's
that's awesome. You know, so you work in more of this indie space at this point, and you even directed films, short films at least, and have your own projects that you've worked on, which I want to talk a little bit more about later. But I do wonder, do you aspire to work on more mainstream films in the future? Is that the direction you'd like your career to go in, or is this a space that you're happiest?
I mean, it will depend on the project, you know, because I think more mainstream allows you to, you know, have a, you know, explore these bigger ideas that you couldn't on a bigger budget. At the same time, you have, you know, people who are, you know, putting money and expecting returns into movies expect more of checking a lot of boxes to make sure people leave a theater with a very specific type of good time. And I think the indie space, the audience is always just looking for more broadly to something they haven't seen before and a new experience, which allows you to start poking into those corners and not having to worry about like, well, in Reel 7, it's like dragging a lot, so we need to make sure that everyone is having a good time. It's like, no, I mean, like maybe we need to drag a little bit because it's supposed to hit this thing and make people feel uncomfortable here. Like those little things. I don't know. That's where my brain goes as an editor.
Yeah, no, it's fast. I think I've heard this rule of thumb before. I don't know how accurate it is, but I've heard this rule of thumb before in horror films that you have to have a scare like every 10 or 15 minutes or something like that.
Yeah, I've heard something that.
I'm like, no, don't do that.
I mean, you know, there's definitely like rules of thumb like that where it's just like, yeah, you don't want the audience to be bored, because if you have a horror film, I guess you know, you do. People are coming in with a set of expectations. I mean, I'm the kind of guy who loves when a movie upends its expectations and surprises you. But, you know, you also want to be like, you know, giving people a decent time with what they're doing. So, and if you do give them like those scares and those moments, you could be able to afford like an extra 10 minutes to go and start talking about the stuff you want to talk about. There's a whole, I love starting with a rule of thumb and then breaking it from there.
I wish more movies would do that. Like, here's a rule of thumb. In fact, I mean, the new Scream just came out, and Scream is just notorious for like, you know, being all meta and finding these tropes and these rules of thumb with horror films and just and exploiting that. And so I think that's what's made. I mean, the series has been kind of up and down, but that's what made the first two Screams so fantastic. It was really analyzing these rules that horror movies tend to adhere by, and then exploiting them. So I really like that, just upending expectations, and hopefully you get plenty of projects that do that, because I think that makes for great cinematic experiences.
Ah, man, I hope so. That's what I live for day to day, is to have because the right project is just going to make so many things like, you know, it's like, yeah, I'll do it. I'll figure out my schedule. I'll figure out the rate. If you're really passionate about something like that, then yeah, you'll make it work. So hopefully there's more of those.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so one thing, being on the technical side of filmmaking, I do wonder more about how you experience film. I know as a film critic, I don't watch movies the same way my friends do. We're watching the same thing, but different things are going through my mind than theirs, because I'm like constantly analyzing it and criticizing it or whatever. But you know, as an editor, I wonder if you do the same thing. Like, can you watch a film and just enjoy it purely for it being a film, or are you also constantly looking at like editing techniques and like analyzing how the editing is done?
I can never turn it off. I can not anymore. I'm past the point. The faucet is going full blast, and there's no way to. The pressure's too. No, I mean I do you know, when I was first discovering movies, you know, I was like wondering what was a good versus a bad movie. You know, that's kind of what you start with, and you're like, oh, I know what my tastes are, or I know what, like, what's working, what doesn't work. And as the older I get, the more ingrained I get in a film, the more I do see these editing techniques where it's just like, you know, one of my favorite movies the last like few years, even though it's older than that, but I've dug into it more and more. It's Shutter Island, because that movie just has hidden editing techniques everywhere that you will never see until you see it for like a fifth or sixth time.
Right.
But like, I also get to the point where my film tastes are so specifically towards seeing something new that I rather see something that takes wild swings and misses than something that is safe and good, but I've seen it before. And that's where people's film tastes, the more you dive into it, become more than just binary good or bad. You go for like, what are they trying to go for? What was some of the techniques they used to get there? And did you emotionally connect with it? And that's kind of what, you know, my favorite film critics that I don't read too many, but when I do, I love when they just break down like the experience and how it hit them overall. So that's, you know, I got to read more of your stuff, Thomas. I guess I just, like, makes me want to go down your road, because this is
man,
great.
It's always fun to have these conversations, and like I said, typically I have a beer in my hand, but that's yeah, this is always fun for me. And so you know, I appreciate the conversation. What I was actually thinking about as you're talking about that is another style of filmmaking that I really like. And since I'm talking to an editor, this isn't on my question sheet, but since I'm talking to an editor, one of the things one of the things I really like in films are either long takes or one take styles. Have you ever worked on anything like that? If not, do you want to? And also, what is your take on one takes?
I'm about to actually start editing a feature, if it goes, hopefully, like with terms of like with the pandemic production, that is supposed to be all one take. And not to go into it too heavily, because they haven't really announced stuff like it, but you saw like synchronic is like got a beginning, it's got a taste of a long take.
Yes,
and
that's right.
And you'll be surprised that with this new feature and in synchronic, when they tackled that, they had me be in there to really shape and watch the monitor for pacing in the moment, because yeah, you are locked in on a flow when you're shooting one takes, and you kind of have to, like, you know, it's easier on my end to execute, obviously, stitching together one shots, because their options are limited, but you really do need to be there early on to see if, like, all right, you're holding on this thing too long, you probably need to get out of this quicker, or let's settle here. Like, you kind of have to be with the director to make sure that what they want in the flow is coming across the way they want. So I love one take movies. It's just a different type of editing where you might have to be a little bit more in hands on the rehearsals and rehearsals and production.
Yeah, it's fun actually. I just thought about that question, but like momentarily forgot that synchronic actually does have a really nice opening kind of one take thing going on. So that's really cool that you're able to work on that. And it just really, I think it lets the scene breathe and be what it is. And I don't know about you as an editor, maybe you have an opinion about this, but I really severely dislike when there's too much cutting. Action movies do this a lot. And I'm like, guys, y'all learned all this choreography. And then you're gonna chop it up with a whole bunch of like cuts. I think the Bourne movies were where I realized all this cutting is not necessary.
Man, I'm glad you said. I mean, okay, I'm not gonna be the kind of guy who just sits here. I will never slam a movie. I will never sit here and be like, oh, that movie was bad. I have a hard time getting into Bourne movies because of that exact thing. And my brain, because of my brain, the more I'm into editing, the more I would like to process a shot. And when you have and there's like mathematical things where processing a shot, you really do need to sit on something for like seconds at a time. And the quicker you cut and the more kinetic the image is, the more like your brain will understand something, but never really process what you just saw. It's more of like a feeling. And I guess sometimes, you know, fight sequences can get that across to certain audience members, but man, just give me like Jackie Chan going wide and I'm like in heaven, because my eyes, I'm going to use my webcam for a second, but I get more appreciation from my eye just darting around a shot that's static than me just constantly trying to focus on something that flashes too much.
Right.
And
Yeah.
the only like director editing combo recently that does quick cutting that works is Mad Max Fury Road with George Miller. Is like he keeps things center frame and still, so it allows him to cut quickly because our eyes are never moving from cut to cut. And therefore you're just sitting there and you're being like, I see the gun, I see the punch, I see Tom Hardy, like, because they're all center frame and he's able to cut really quickly. That's just how my brain works, though.
No, understandable. And I think that's a fantastic way of looking at it. I think it works for some people. And like I said, we probably watch movies a lot differently than our friends who aren't as involved in this analysis process. So maybe it doesn't bother them as much, but yeah, that's something that I think about a lot when I watch a film.
I think they call editing the invisible art, because sometimes you just you feel it, but you don't really recognize it. So
I think it's very similar to like scoring a film, right? If it's done well, you don't notice it. So
agree.
Yeah, it's only when it's not done well that then people say, oh, that wasn't done well. But yeah, there's so many times where it's underappreciated because it is done so well, or it's done so fluently or authentically. So yeah. I was wondering, and this might be, I think this is going to start winding us down, but obviously we're going through this thing called COVID, and that has had an effect on everyone's careers, every industry, and whatever. And obviously in this film, it's a smaller production, smaller cast. So, I'm sure that Aaron and Justin had a lot of limitations to work with in making this film. But I wondered, as an editor, what kind of challenges or anything that was imposed by COVID, how did that affect your role in making this movie?
There's a couple of things that are different, especially with a crew this small. Like, everyone talks about shooting in COVID with a small crew, but it literally was Aaron, Justin, and their producer Dave in a room together for pretty much most of the time. So one person has to do camera, one person has to roll sound. So it's tricky because they're so concentrated on performances and getting the execution down. Sometimes there's not somebody there with a stopwatch to make sure how long the take is going. So, it's some of the hardest scenes that I edited in Something in the Dirt were the ones that were like really emotional, actor invested. But boy, man, there's a good 12-minute scene there that needs to be much shorter. So a lot of that stuff from scene to scene was like good long conversations over like a Zoom like this with Justin and Aaron, who I couldn't sit down with, really. Talking about what was important from those types of scenes. And, just a lot more conversations were our answers, a lot more hard discussions about what these characters are going through, what was important to be said. And then on top of it was the fact that we had the Zoom connection, and they're sometimes not even in the city during post-production. I sat down with them one time in person, the entire production. And it was when we were picture locking or not even picture locking, it was just like putting in VFX. Like we already picture locked remotely. And then we had sat down and did VFX in person when there was no variant. It was one of the ways between variants. So
wow.
Yeah.
That's tough, but you guys pulled it off, and well done for that. And obviously, getting into Sundance, I don't think I congratulated you on that. That's what an accomplishment.
Yeah, thanks. I've been to Sundance before as I've worked sometimes with like media and stuff like that, and then sometimes I've attended. This is the first time I've had something here, so it's that I've worked on. That's really exciting. So thank you.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. Well, anything else that you'd like people to know? Anything you want to say to audiences who either have or want to experience Something in the Dirt?
If you go, the more open your mind is when you go in, the more of a great time you have. That's literally the best way I could describe it. Go in with an open mind and you'll be surprised.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you for this conversation, Michael. I really appreciated it. And for those listening, Michael Felker is the editor of Something in the Dirt, which had its world premiere at Sundance this past Sunday. And it was a film that very much accomplishes what you might expect out of a Aaron and Justin film. So Cool. For everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in. And until next time, keep it for real.